Medieval times were a time to be alive, marked by well-written tales of heroism, outlandish battles, and stories of knights rescuing princesses. While some of this did in fact occur, the medieval times were not all metaphorical sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of death and illnesses, and where most people in trade suffer from this, doctors and medicine excelled, but not in the way we see it now. The understanding of medical care and physiology was built on the understanding that our bodies made fluids. And depending on what fluid your body was leaking at that time, would tell the doctor what ailment you were suffering from. The four liquids used for these observations were yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. They were controlled by the four elements: fire, earth, water, and air. All illnesses were diagnosed as being an imbalance of them. How do you fix this? You may be thinking. Next time, don't think because you just open up Pandora's box. One of the treatments was bloodletting. It's where the doctor cuts your forearm and you bleed. That is it. It's amazing, isn't it? This is the most used example of medieval practice, though. There are countless others, some worse, some better. Before we get into that, let's go over the different types of doctors, even though there were few. Most doctors back then were physicians, those who were trained in the art of diagnosis. They would diagnose someone's illness through observation, palpitation, feeling one's pulse, and urine examination. Urine examination was done through collecting urine in a flask and looking for anything that seems to be out of the ordinary. And taste. They would taste the urine. You cannot pay me enough money to do that. This was the most prevalent way of diagnosing patients back then, so much so that the image of a doctor was a flask, like how today it's the stethoscope or insanely high costs. Another type of doctor was the barber surgeon. Think of combining a physician, surgeon, and a barber into one guy. That's a barber surgeon. They did the same things as a physician and more, as in they had the equipment to amputate, treat other ailments, and whatever you had, or hair. Got a bad laceration, your hair's too long? You can get both of them fixed by your local barber surgeon the same day. Other practices done include cataract removal, cauterization, dental extraction, and trepanning, which is the act of perforating the skull to relieve pressure on the brain, were all practiced. Surgeons would use wines for antiseptic and opiates, what we now know as narcotics, as a stand-in for anesthesia. I almost said euthanasia. They didn't euthanize people. They would never do that. Not on purpose. Midwives took care of primarily childbirth. I'm leaving that in. I'm leaving all of this in. And child ailments. For the sick and dying, there were hospitals that were sometimes attached to large monasteries, but most of them were community held and were independent of the monasteries. The last major ideology used back then was the use of medicinal herbs. It was the use of herbs to cure ailments and was credited with curing multiple diseases back then. Some of this can be true due to we still using herbs for their medicinal purposes, such as aspirin, which comes from this salicin inside the bark of a willow tree. So it could have at least helped with certain ailments or calmed a person in their final moments. I mean, yeah, it would have been true because opioids were used as painkillers. I mean, they still technically are today. Our definition of some sort of painkiller or ones used in hospitals nowadays are narcotics. So they're highly addictive, and that's why they're very hard to get, your hands on. That's why you need a prescription, or they're only used inside of hospitals. But back then, we didn't know what addiction was, so we just kind of went, oh, here's drugs, get better. So they kind of are like that today. That is all for medieval practices. Until next time, for the love of God, do not ask questions when it comes to this. It keeps me up at night. The images I've had to see is not very good. Don't look it up.